There is a version of you that lies awake at night, not because of tomorrow, because of something that already happened, something you cannot take back, cannot rewrite, cannot undo, no matter how many times you return to it in your mind. You replay it. You see the moment clearly, the decision, the word, the action, the silence. You see what you should have done instead. And then the voice begins. It tells you what kind of person you are for having done it, what you lost, what you destroyed, what you will never get back. And here is the thing nobody tells you about that voice. It is not the mistake that is hurting you. You have been living inside your own punishment for a long time, and most people spend years, sometimes decades, confusing that punishment with accountability. They believe that if they suffer long enough, something will change. That the pain is somehow erasing what happened. That they owe the past a debt, and suffering is the only currency that pays it. But the Stoics understood something deeply uncomfortable about this. The mistake is already finished. The moment is sealed, and the only person keeping you inside it is you. This is not about minimizing what happened. It is not about pretending the consequences weren't real. It is about understanding a fundamental truth that Marcus Aurelius recorded for himself, not for posterity, not for an audience, just for the honest confrontation of his own mind. You cannot control what has already occurred. You can only control what you do with the mind you still have. By the time you finish this, you will understand why self-punishment is not strength, not justice, and not accountability. You will understand what Stoic philosophy actually prescribes when you have done something you cannot undo. And you will see why continuing to destroy yourself isn't honoring the weight of your mistakes. It is simply wasting the life that is still in front of you. Stay with this. There is a difference between pain and suffering. Pain is what happens to you. Suffering is what you keep doing to yourself. Epictetus, a man born into slavery, who had no legal ownership of his own body, whose chains were literal before they were philosophical, taught this with complete clarity. He said that men are not disturbed by what happens to them, but by their judgment about what happens to them, not by what happens, by the judgment about what happens. The wound from a mistake is real. The damage it caused to a relationship, to a business, to a person you loved, to the version of your life you had planned, that is real. Nobody is asking you to pretend otherwise. But there is the wound, and then there is the constant returning to pick it open. There is the event, and then there is the trial you keep conducting inside your own mind, long after the event is over. You are the judge and the defendant in a case that has already been decided. And every time you return to prosecute yourself again, you are not doing justice. You are simply reopening something that would otherwise begin to close. Think about a physical wound. Left alone, it heals. Interfered with constantly, it becomes something worse. Your mind works the same way. It knows how to process difficulty. What it cannot process is someone who keeps pulling it back before it can finish. So ask yourself honestly, is the pain you are carrying still teaching you something, or has it become a habit? Is it still useful information about your values and your choices, or is it a cycle you have become so accustomed to that you no longer notice how much it is costing you every single day? Because it is costing you something real. Every hour spent inside the past is an hour not spent inside the only place where anything can actually be built. The past is immovable, the present is not. And yet most people spend the whole of their present trying to change something that is already permanent. That is not grief. That is not accountability. That is destruction of a different kind. But this raises the real question, and it is the one most people never stop long enough to ask. If self-punishment is not helping, if it is not changing anything, not restoring anything, not producing anything, why does the mind keep returning to it? The answer is uncomfortable, and it changes everything. Here is what nobody says about regret. Self-punishment feels like it is doing something. When you carry guilt, when you replay the mistake, when you lie awake condemning yourself, it creates a sensation of control. As though the suffering is a form of payment. As though if you feel badly enough, long enough, intensely enough, some invisible scale will eventually balance. As though the past will somehow respond to your pain. It will not. Seneca wrote that there is no condition more wretched than the person who keeps adding suffering to what is already finished, believing that the weight of their remorse will alter what cannot be altered. The Roman Stoics were surrounded by real loss. They watched empires crumble, friendships betray, health deteriorate without warning. They were not naive about the consequences, but they saw through the illusion clearly. A person who suffers over what is finished does not honor the loss. They simply create a second one. You have already paid one price. The price the mistake demanded. The relationship that ended. The opportunity that closed. The trust that was broken. The version of your future that did not happen. That price was real. You paid it whether you wanted to or not. But then there is the second price. The one you keep choosing. Every day you carry this, you pay again. Not to anyone else. Not to the person you hurt or the situation you failed to navigate well. You pay it to no one. It disappears into nothing and produces nothing. It does not repair. It does not restore. It does not rebuild. It only spends you. And here is where it becomes something more than a problem of grief or guilt. Because buried underneath the self-punishment, underneath all of it, is something that most people never look at directly. Because looking at it requires confronting something they are not prepared to see. This is the part that cuts the deepest. You believe you are punishing yourself out of humility, because you are a person who takes their failures seriously. Because you have a conscience and you are using it. But buried inside most intense self-punishment is something that looks nothing like humility. It is pride. The secret assumption at the center of deep regret is this: that there exists a version of you, a better, more capable, more aware version, who would never have made that mistake. And you are punishing the flawed version of yourself for failing to be that idealized one. You are not condemning an action, you are condemning a human being for being human. Marcus Aurelius, who governed an empire, who made decisions that shaped entire civilizations, understood this. He wrote that what disturbs a person is not the mistake, but what they have decided the mistake means. And what most people decide it means is that they are broken in a way that cannot be repaired. That is not an honest assessment of a past action. That is a verdict on your entire identity. And it is a verdict the evidence does not support. You made a decision with the knowledge you had then, with the emotional state you were carrying then, with the limitations, pressures, and blind spots that existed. In that specific moment, you are now judging that decision using understanding you only possess because of what happened. That is not accountability. That is a standard no one could ever meet, applied retroactively, to someone who no longer even fully exists. Because that person, the one who made that choice, was operating inside a reality you no longer inhabit. Understanding this is not making excuses, it is being accurate. And the Stoics were obsessed with accuracy, not with feeling better, not with comfort, with seeing things as they actually are. And what they saw, clearly, was that a person who condemns themselves endlessly is not being righteous. They are being imprecise. The real question is not, why did I make that mistake? The real question is, what have I decided that mistake means? about who I am, because that decision, the quiet verdict you keep rendering every time you replay it, is the one that still has consequences. The original mistake is finished. This one is still in progress. The Stoics did not ask you to ignore your failures. They asked you to use them correctly. Guilt, in its proper function, is a compass. It tells you what you value. It shows you where your actions fell away from the kind of person you are trying to be. It points you toward something. And once you have understood that direction, once you have extracted what the experience has to teach, the compass has done its work. What most people do instead is stare at the compass until they can no longer see anything else. They take a tool designed to point forward and use it to anchor themselves in place. Epictetus made a distinction that matters more here than almost anything else. He separated what is within our power from what is not. And he was completely clear. The past is not within our power, not partially, not with enough effort, not with the right words or the right amount of remorse. The past is the one thing in the universe that is permanently, unconditionally, beyond reach. Every ounce of energy you direct toward it is energy you are pulling away from what is actually available to you today. What remains within your power is your judgment right now, your response, this moment, the character you are quietly building, with every decision you still get to make. Not your last decision, your next one. Seneca wrote something that sounds deceptively simple. Begin at once to live, and count each day as a separate life. Not a continuation of the worst chapter, not a consequence stretching forward from a single moment of failure. A life, complete in itself, beginning now. Every morning a threshold you can choose to cross differently. This is not amnesia. The memory of what happened does not disappear. It should not. But the weight you attach to it, the sentence you carry, that is not fixed. That is something you are choosing. And choices, unlike the past, can still be changed. There is one more thing you need to understand before this can fully land. The person who made that mistake is not entirely the same person you are now. Not because you have escaped responsibility, but because experience changes people. The very fact that you carry this weight, that you feel the gravity of it, that you came looking for a way through it, that is evidence of someone who has grown from what happened. Even if the growth was painful, even if it cost more than you ever agreed to pay, you are judging someone from the past, with the eyes of someone in the present. Marcus Aurelius returned to his private journal every day, not to document his victories, not to perform virtue for anyone else, to examine where he had fallen short, to think through what he would do differently, and then to prepare himself for the next day. He did not spend pages inside self-condemnation. He spent pages building himself forward. The examination was always in service of movement, not permanent residence in failure. He was an emperor who understood he was capable of error. And he did not let that understanding destroy him. He let it direct him. Your mistakes are not your identity. They are your raw material. What you build with them from this point forward, that is your identity. Here is where everything the Stoics built comes together into a single point. You cannot control what happened. It is finished, sealed, immovable. No intensity of feeling directed at it will change a single word of what occurred. But you are not powerless. You have complete authority over what happens inside you, from this moment forward, over your interpretation of what the experience means about your future, over the person you are choosing to become in response to it, over what you allow yourself to believe about your own worth, your own capacity, and what is still possible. That is not a small thing. That is the only thing that matters now. Because the only place your life can actually be changed is not behind you. It is here. in the choices you are making right now about how you will carry this and whether you will let it determine what is still open to you. Seneca observed that most people exhaust entire days so consumed by what has already passed that they never fully inhabit the day they are actually living. The present moves through their hands, while their mind is somewhere fixed and permanent and gone. The same trap exists today. It looks the same, it feels the same, and the answer Stoicism offers is the same answer it has always offered: not forgetting, not pretending, not performing a kind of false peace that has no roots, simply stopping the punishment that no longer serves any function, stopping the trial whose verdict you have already delivered, more times than you can count. Stopping the return to something that will not change, no matter how faithfully you revisit it. You came to this with something heavy. You have been carrying it, perhaps for months, perhaps far longer. Returning to the same moment, the same decision, the same version of yourself that you cannot stop condemning. And when you arrived, you may have believed that the problem was the mistake itself. But you understand something now that you did not fully see before. The mistake is finished. What is not finished is the punishment. And the punishment, unlike the mistake, is a choice. It is not something that simply happened to you. It is something you keep choosing. Every time you follow the thought back into the same dark rooms, the same accusations, the same verdict you have read to yourself 100 times. That is still a decision, and decisions, unlike the past, can be unmade. The Stoics did not ask you to live without regret. They asked you to be intelligent with it, to take from it what is useful, the lesson, the correction, the sharper understanding of what you value, and to leave behind what is not useful, which is everything that keeps you anchored to something you cannot touch. You cannot change what you did, but you have not yet decided who you are because of it. That decision is still open, and it is the only one that still has any power over your life. The question you carry from this is not whether you deserve to move forward, it is whether you are willing to stop paying for what is already paid. Whether you are willing to grant yourself the same principle the Stoics held without compromise, that a person of character is not defined by their worst moment, but by what they choose to build after it. You have already survived this. You are still here. The only question left is what you do with that. If this reached something you needed to hear, share it with someone who is still living inside their own courthouse. Sometimes the person right beside you has been waiting for someone to hand them the key.